Hello and welcome back to the Gallant Goblin. I'm Theo.
I'm Grady.
And we are gathered around the table today to talk about week 2 of the RPG Writer Workshop. Week 1 was about getting your stuff prepared, finding a place to sit and write, doing outlining, mood mapping, mood boarding, mind mapping, and just generally getting set up and ready to go. Week 2 was doing the writing, actually sitting down with your mood map board and your mind map and your outline and trying to write 3,500 words or more or much more of your one-shot adventure.
Hopefully this panicked impression you're giving off right now is not how you approached the entire week.
I'm sure that all of us who are doing this together, none of us are panicked at all, knowing that it's halfway done. And
don't say that.
It's halfway done. And that we need to be done by next week because we need a week for formatting. We need a week to figure out, and this is the thing that...
Editing, playtesting.
Right. In my mind, I have playtesting coming up on Friday and Sunday. I have 2 playtesting sessions set up. I had to figure out how, and I assume they tell us this at some point.
Deep breaths.
I assume they tell us this at some point. How to format this for the final publication. How to get it into a format that looks like this is a D&D one-shot, as opposed to this is a Word document that looks like a Word document. And, how to incorporate the pictures and all the licensing and stat blocks and things like that. So let's talk about week 2.
I know. Dial it back.
Yes. So Grady, I know Grady's been super busy this week, not only with his full-time job, but also with getting the Kingmaker video ready, showing you the Kingmaker miniatures, 45, 46 of which we published in a video today.
Yes, today.
This morning. Go watch that, click the eye in the corner and go check that out, but then come right back here and watch this video. But no, between the 2 of those things, you haven't had a lot of time. Have you gotten anything done on the project?
Well, So I am becoming very empathetic with everyone who is trying to follow their passions while working multiple jobs. I guess I'm doing that too, but I feel like I work an office job, and so I feel like I at least, I'm not like on my feet all day or doing something very strenuous. But yeah, I picked this shirt for today because I feel like it kind of really is representing me very well, being
out of time,
very weird. Well, out of time, yeah, thank you. And just being a general mess of an alternate reality crossover car crash. So I think we are having a bit of a divergence in our experience with the workshop, and I don't want to blame it all on time management. Part of it for me is also just that I'm the sort of person who likes to take some time to kind of stew over ideas. And like I mentioned last week, I basically changed what I was going to do right toward the end of that week. And so this week has kind of been me trying to actually figure out the entirety of the idea. And coming from a fiction writing background, I've noticed that there are a lot of differences because 2 things, right? One, the players are the main characters, basically. And that was something that I've had to try to keep in mind as I'm doing this, because mine has the quest giver NPC is actually also supposed to be the main character of the one shot. For me, a lot of the themes and the stories is about discovering what she's experiencing and kind of going through what she experienced. But obviously you don't want this to be a situation where everybody's just sitting there listening to the DM perform a one-person play. And so for me, it's been like, okay, so if this was the experience, how do you make the players live through something similar without completely forcing the players to role play somebody that's not them, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to let them be able to still be themselves, be their class, play as they would play, but understand how this character is feeling. And for me, that's being a really big challenge. So I've had to try to figure that out as well, and that's kind of something a little strange.
You're writing a story that doesn't you're not writing the main characters.
Right.
And so, yeah, and the main character is usually the one who are pushing the plot along.
Right, and you don't know how the players are going to push the plot along either, because you don't want to railroad them too much. I mean, being a one-shot, there's some, but yeah. Anyway, how about you, though? I know that you've been very diligently working on it. I know that you've been carving out good portions of time each day and making sure that you're doing writing or thinking about it. And it seems like you've been making good progress, although I don't know the details. So, I mean, how's it going?
Well, I mean, I work, my full-time job is in public education, and I'm a school psychologist, which means that I have summers off. So I'm not working right now. So I have a lot more time on my hands than you do. I don't start working until the end of July. The last week of July, I start working. So we're going to see how that goes. I need to get a lot done next week. But otherwise, it's gone well this week. I think that I took my idea of what I wanted to do, which was fairly standard, I think, and a little vanilla and maybe not so exciting. And I think that I managed to have some ideas on how to give it some shape and form and meaning and make it not as cookie cutter an adventure as it may have been otherwise. It was a bit unique, I think, but I think I managed to turn a few conventions possibly on their heads. I like when I do writing, I don't write much. Like you have a lot of history in writing. I don't generally, but I do like speculative fiction, science fiction, and I like the aspect of it that like your good episode of Star Trek, which is you're writing in metaphor, and what you say it has some bearing on current day circumstances in the world, or speaks to some problem, societal issue or personal issue or something. And I like to put that in my writing. So, I wouldn't be excited about writing like, oh, let's just go delve in the dungeon and fight a dragon and get a treasure.
There's nothing necessarily wrong with that.
No, it's just, that's not right. I don't
right.
find that super interesting. I like, developing characters or whatever, but I figured out that the metaphor for what I'm writing is actually, and I didn't realize this until recently, is actually gaslighting. If you're not familiar with the term gaslighting, it is kind of a psychological abuse that one person perpetrates on another, where they make that person question their reality, question their very sanity by lying to them, manipulating them, denying things that have really happened. And they do this on such a gradual basis and with such consistency that a person's self-esteem and their own confidence and their own thinking and abilities wears down to the point where they become psychologically broken a lot of times. And I realized that my villain in this adventure was kind of doing that. And so I really wanted to run with that idea. Okay. So previously, and I'm talking a lot, I'll get back to you in a second. No. But previously my villain in the adventure was really manipulating things from the shadows. That was the original idea. And he had servants that would go and do it. Then you eventually find the villain and fight him. And I realized that once I had this metaphor, I really wanted my villain to be doing what these kind of villains do. They, people who gaslight, they are narcissists. They want to be the center of attention. They want, in their own kind of weird way, everyone to like them or need them or, look up to them. And so I decided that instead of my villain being in the shadows, he's going to be center stage. He's going to be present out there the whole time, which is going to be interesting. It's also going to possibly present problems and in a gameplay session. So I'll find that out when I play test it on Friday. But yeah, so that was sort of my epiphany, and I've been working through that. And I also want to, in the book, as I write it, in the adventure, I need to write up for the DM, one, like how the narcissists work, how to role play a narcissist and a gaslighter. And then I need to also have a section, how to role play a victim of gaslighting. And of course, every victim is different, but I want to put, there's enough similarities and traits in there. I want to put that in there because part of what I want people to get out of this is to possibly recognize these behaviors and say like, this sounds like maybe something that's happening to somebody I care about, or maybe recognize things in their own lives if it's happening to them. And so through role playing, hopefully teach the players to recognize certain symptoms. And then at the end, have information about, like, if you did recognize something about this adventure in your own life, here are things you can do. And I was talking with Satine today a little bit about it, and she was recommending some of those things. She recommended a book because it's something that she's gone through in her own life, and she's had to deal with it and overcome it. And so she recommended the book to me. It's coming in this week. I'm going to read that. So that's kind of that part of what I did this week, and trying to give it meaning and purpose. The other thing that took up especially the first half of my week is I really wanted some nice artwork for my piece. I wanted, and I have no preconceptions that my thing that I'm writing is going to make any money at all. So I know that any money I spend on art is just going to be for my own enjoyment, and so
which we're lucky enough that we can do that. But that actually brings to mind something that I think you had told me about. That stuck with me for better or for worse, because if you remember from the first video, I talked about always being very focused on style over substance sometimes. But in any case,
remind me of something else. Go ahead. No.
Yeah. So I think I don't remember who it was, but it was somebody at Wizards, right? It was Chris Perkins maybe, who had said at one point that somebody asked him, what's the most important part of if I want to sell an adventure, what's the most important thing I need to focus on? And his response was the art.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't want to put words in Chris Perkins' mouth, but I remember it was somebody.
Chris Perkins 100% said that.
Okay, so it was Chris Perkins, and we were kind of like, that's
cover art especially, I think. Right?
Yeah. But I mean, if you think about it, humans are very visual, right? A lot of us are. Those of us, lucky enough to be able to see, and so he was just making the point that having a very attractive and evocative artwork, it often helps sell something. And then this goes back to the mood board too, right? The reason they recommend it is because it inspires you, and in some ways can even shape what you're writing. And so I think that art is a very important thing to have. Obviously, it's a bit of a luxury, and if you can't have it, then certainly I think your adventure can certainly stand on its own without it. But if you can do it, or even if you're just lucky enough to do sketches or anything, having that kind of interspersed throughout to kind of accent certain aspects of it, and then of course having the very good art is important. And I think that's one of the things that's hanging me up as well, is that for mine, I also wanted to be a filmmaker, and so I visualize a lot of scenes a lot. And so for me, I'm like, there are certain things where I think I want it to look like this, and I want people to see it in a similar way. And so for me, knowing that I'm not going to be able to get art together within this month kind of has been a little demoralizing for me.
And of course you can wait, and you don't have to publish at the end of the month.
Right, and so I think for me at least, my goal is to have, I also wanted to have several branching paths, because my main path is very railroady to an extent. Most of mine takes place in a dream sequence, and so obviously reality is a bit more malleable in that sense. So,
and I'll jump in and say one other thing I really needed art for was the middle part of my adventure takes place in a particular setting in a village. And I was having a real hard time writing that section up with area 1, area 2, area 3, and what happens in those areas. And so I really wanted a visual to help myself in the writing process. And so I know there's a lot of pretty good software out there these days. And so I did a lot of hunting. I ended up with something called Incarnate, which you can check the description below, and we'll have a link to it down below. But they have a lot of art assets. It's $5 a month. So while some things are really expensive, you can get this for $5, and it makes... and we'll show the art. Here's the art of the village that I put together for this adventure. You can see it on the screen now. And I put this together in 15 minutes using the art assets available on this product. And in paying for the license to use it at $5 a month, you get the ability to use it in any commercial purposes you want. So I can put it in my DM Skill product and it'll be fine. But having that nice map, that helped me so much in visualizing what I wanted to happen in that area. And so that was one thing that really helped. And as far as finding, I'm sorry, you want to add something to that?
Oh, no, go ahead.
And as far as finding artists for the cover, that was a hard part. I went and talked to the Discord a little bit. Folks on the Discord were really kind. They pointed me to hashtags I could look at online. on Twitter. There's like Portfolio Day, I think was one. Commissions Open is another hashtag. Things like that. I looked at Instagram, and I ended up a lot of the artists I found, either commissions were closed or they were really expensive, or the time frame was just too tight for anybody to get it done. And so I remember I also play a game on the computer called Guild Wars 2, which Kate Welch used to work on. But I went, that forum in the subreddit has a lot of good art that people have commissioned for their characters. And I went and searched through that, and I found an artist there named Victor Tan. And I'll put a link to his Instagram down below too. And I contacted him, and he had time. He gave me a price. It was something I could barely afford. And yeah, he's working on it now. I'm so excited. If you go look at his Instagram, you can kind of get a sense of the things that he does. And he's going to do, my cover's going to be the villain of the piece, the narcissist. And kind of his setting. And so I'm super excited to see what that's going to be like. Let's dive into the actual seminar this week. The first class, lesson number 5, was crafting tough decisions. This was maybe the most helpful one so far for me, or one of the most. And it's also one that I think I'm having the most trouble with. So when in the lesson about crafting tough decisions, we talk about why it's important. That, you know, gives the players agency. It makes the game unpredictable for the GM and keeps things interesting. It gives the players a feeling of agency. And they list on types of decisions that you can offer your players, like mutually exclusive choices and choice of risk versus reward, and things along those lines. So what did you think about this lesson?
Yeah, I thought it was great. At first, I was kind of like, oh yeah, I mean, some of these things seem like no-brainers, like, oh, don't make the players choose a decision in which they have no idea what the outcome will be, right? It's a blind decision, at which point they might as well just roll a dice and pick something randomly. And there's no stakes in that, and it doesn't feel good if bad things happen, and it doesn't feel good if they chose correctly. But like, the more I thought about it as I was trying to write my thing, like, the more I realized that, this can be kind of subtle how some of these problematic choices creep in. And I guess as an example for mine, right, I mentioned that mine was kind of a dream sequence, and it was kind of a character story, right? And it actually ties into it's kind of the opposite of your gaslighting issue, though, where basically the main quest-giving NPC is an unreliable narrator in mine. So as opposed to trying to gaslight the players, she fully believes what she's saying, but what she's saying is incorrect because her own perception has been warped. And so this is a problem, because if the players come in taking what's happening at face value, they're going to be led down an entirely incorrect road. But you don't want to punish players for, not realizing that someone is lying to them, especially since in this case, if they were to roll an insight check, or do a detect thoughts, it's going to come back that she's being truthful. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I was like, okay, well then, yeah, how do you try to do this? And so for me, I kind of tried to approach it in 2 angles. And again, this is part of why it's probably not going to get done this month. But one of it was, first of all, to try to add some thematic elements or things that the DM can hint at, to try to be consistent in the way this world is being described, to give players hints. And I know I have one other friend that I talked to, Cassie, who's helped us with a few of the magic videos in the past, who will
Cassie,
completely.
You're watching this,
she's
right?
gonna text me after hearing this thing and being like, you're completely off base. No one is going to catch on to this. But my idea was to use color coding, wherein certain, and you see this in movies too, right? Where things like in The Matrix, right? And when they're in The Matrix, it's tinted green. When they're in the real world, it's tinted blue. And so I'm kind of like, when you try to describe this, like certain things, you need to make sure that the things that are consistently for one side or one side of the truth should be kind of described in a certain way with certain colors, and the other things should be described in another way. And then, like in a combat interaction, for example, like in this case, my adventure involves like the Raven Queen. And so there's going to be, I guess, my idea was have like kind of black feathered ravens and white feathered ravens. And the way these, and though these may both interact with the players, one of them maybe damages the player and one of them heals the player, even if the NPC is saying that the one that heals the player is bad. And so from these kind of interactions, they can start picking up on, well, should we be questioning what this person is telling us? Is something, is there more to this narrative than what we are seeing? And then the other thing was to say, like, if they do just decide to follow what they're saying, to basically craft a failure path that does not feel punishing. Because in this particular case, at least, it shouldn't be, because the players didn't necessarily do anything wrong in taking that path. And so now I'm trying to craft a kind of second narrative that still is intellectually rewarding to the players and also still gives them appropriate rewards at the end. With, in this case, the failure condition is going to be more combat heavy, so maybe the rewards will be something that's more useful to combat interested players, whereas the other one is more role play heavy, and that one maybe gives them more rewards that are more role play based or social based and things like that. So those were kind of the two things that I was looking at. How about you?
Well, it sounds like yours, like, it's really you're gonna learn a lot in playtesting. Like, do they pick up on the color thing?
Yeah.
Like, it's really going to take a lot of playtesting and fine-tuning and seeing the reactions of different players, see kind of what they pick up on, what they don't. And then it's also, how good the GM is at incorporating that.
Putting a big burden on the GM.
Possibly. So, yeah. But playtesting, you'll learn a lot, I think.
Yeah. So
as far as mine goes, I didn't feel like I had a lot of explicit decisions. Like, there's no point, I feel like, in anything I've written so far where, like in the Walking Dead game, you get a list of 3 options of things to do, and then at the end it's going to be like, oh, this person's going to remember what you did. I don't necessarily feel like what I've done, I feel like, is set up situations that the players find themselves in, and then if the players do nothing, things are going to progressively get worse and worse and worse for them, and worse for the NPCs involved. And so hopefully push the NPCs to act if they don't feel like acting already. But how they're going to solve the problem, I don't even know. Like, I'm relying on them to, I think I've set it up in such a way where if that's the path they decide to go on, they know that they're not going to be successful. Like, if they go straight for, let's just stabby stab, they're gonna know, man, like, we're gonna die. Like, we've got to find some other way of doing it. We've got to find help. We've got to do something, because if we go right at this, no, it's not gonna work. And so,
getting flashbacks to Curse of Strahd now.
It is similar. Like, I feel like Strahd is a fairly, like, good idea of my villain is different than Strahd, but Strahd is a narcissist and a manipulator, if you're familiar with the Curse of Strahd adventure. And so that's not a bad touchstone when thinking about this. But especially early on, like, when Strahd shows up, you've got to be on your best behavior, because he can, like, that. And so, that's kind of what I have right now. I think what I'm going to end up doing is fleshing out my chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, and then possibly going back in there and see if there's any little things I can add in later on that are particular choices or things like that. But no, I'm having trouble with that.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to kind of more just general writing, in my experience, it's always better to write first, edit later. Even if you feel like what you're writing is bad, or you feel like you're not making good progress, you may come back in a day and realize that, oh, hey, what I wrote yesterday when I was feeling down actually is pretty good. It's fine. Or without having that context to play with, right? One of the other lessons they had was, don't be afraid to radically change. Don't be afraid to delete things and go in different directions. You can't do that if you don't have anything written. And so just write is always number one. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Write, and then you'll have something to work with.
Yeah. And I guess my choices really are, I talked about they are going to have to find an alternate way of dealing with this. And I hope that I've seeded enough options in there. Like, maybe they'll realize this is a path we can take, or this is a path we can take. And they have a couple of options there. And then there's a few options that I'm a little concerned about, because there's a few unethical things that they could do to help get them out of their particular predicament. And so I want to be careful with that because it is an option that they have, and I kind of want to make it available to them.
Right.
I'm curious in playtesting to see if they actually pick up on it, because I don't know if they will.
I might.
He might now. I don't know if my other playtesters are watching this. I don't think they watch.
No,
this.
they don't watch it.
So we're safe there. So I think that gives them some options too.
Well, so what is your concern about them taking the unethical option? Is it that you're worried that the adventure is going to reinforce some bad behaviors, or you don't want a party to end up having to be evil? Or
I don't want this to be a how-to gaslight adventure that teaches players, like, oh, if you do this, you get what you want.
So they can gaslight the villain in return?
Not necessarily, not in so many words, but I feel like if they want to...
Like if they give
manipulate... Well, no, if they want to manipulate... Because the NPCs exist in the world too.
Right.
So it's the villain, the players, and NPCs. If they want to be cruel to the NPCs, I think they could be cruel to the NPCs to also help themselves in the adventure. So we'll see how that goes in the thing.
So that brings to mind an interesting question that I've had about your work, which is that when you DM, right, you told our party that we were not allowed to make evil characters. And this was partly just for cohesion purposes, but also for storytelling purposes, that what is the kind of story that you want to tell, right? And in your case, it just simply did not encompass a party of evil people, although we have a party of chaotic neutrals, which sometimes just feels like the same thing. But anyway, we're getting derailed. So I'm curious if that's a consideration that you had in writing your adventure, whether you had a certain alignment in mind, or if you did want to be able to allow for any alignment, or if you have a preference, if you think defining it ahead of time for the GM is a good idea.
I mean, generally assume when, I started writing this, that, you're going to have players who want to help people and make things better. So good aligned characters, probably. Mm-hmm. But I honestly do like the idea that the players can make choices that will not necessarily be good aligned choices. And I like having that option in there because the GM can go in and they can set their own parameters for their own games. Mm-hmm. So I want to leave as much leeway as possible for the GM to set their own limits. Okay. So if they do want to allow things like that, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. That's kind of how I'm approaching it, I guess.
And that makes sense. And I think that's one of the most compelling things that's coming in the Descent into Avernus Baldur's Gate adventure coming up soon, is that they really kind of wanted to dive into those moral dilemmas about even situations where maybe good characters are forced into bad choices or unethical choices for the greater good or for survival, and how you deal with that and how you role play that. So that could, it seems like it's a similar thing.
It's the only thing holding back is the metaphor part of it. Yeah. Is that it could be problematic, and so I just want. That's the only thing. So I'm going to finish it off and play test it and see what happens. And maybe no characters would ever think of the things I'm thinking of that they might do. They may never occur to anybody. Maybe I'm the sadistic one.
That's so not like... People will come up with anything, I think. And to an extent, I think you have to live with that.
But I think that I need to make sure there's repercussions from that. That if they do this, there's a price to pay. And I think that naturally there is in what I've come up with. And so it may be a price I have to pay in their conscience. Mm-hmm. But we'll see. I'll work on that.
Yeah, but that sounds very interesting.
Thank you. Let's jump into Lesson 6. Lesson 6 was developing settings and environments for one-shots. And this was a very different lesson. This was almost a scientific lesson on different terrains, different settings, I suppose. But it was focused on the sort of science behind plains versus prairies versus deserts versus tundras, and how to describe them and how people kind of react in them. Mm-hmm. And I think they tied it into the narrative in the end of the lesson by saying that it can I don't remember if they explicitly said this, but that it can be helpful to have a different biome for your introduction and your crisis and your resolution, and that having that distinct setting and moving things along, that progression can help with the narrative. Mine, I think, definitely has a different setting for all 3 acts. It's different. You're gonna have to wait and see a little bit. But they, like chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 definitely have different settings for my adventure. They're not strictly biological biomes in that sense of the word. Like biological is the wrong word.
Yeah, biome. Like they're not jumping from a desert into an ocean, then into like the top of a mountain. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
but mine does have that. So we'll see how that goes. And I think it could be interesting. How about yours? Yours is dream world.
Yeah, like I said, mine's a dream, so it can become whatever I want it to be, which is a cheat in a way, I feel like. But yeah, in my case, the story is fairly agnostic in terms of where they are. The idea is simply that this is something that obviously you could run it as a one-shot, but if you wanted to slot it into a campaign, you could just do it. The only prerequisite is that the players are traveling on the road, right? And this happens to just be one of the encounters that they have one night on the road. So really they could be anywhere. And so I did have to write with that in mind, because in my head I have a lot of the opening taking place in a forest, because that's where you camp traditionally. That's just what you think. And so I was starting to write and be like, oh well, the trees look like this, and then I'm like, wait, no, but they could be in a desert, so they could be in the tundra. Like you don't know, and so you can't assume that. And so for me that was the extent of it. But I could certainly see other situations where it does impact some of your story. The idea that I was working on before I dropped that one for this one took place underground. And so I actually had originally in mind to say, like, you know, if it's a regular place, then, you know, go for as planned. But if you are in a mountain town or something, or a setting like that, then you may want to consider adding a minor faction, like that. Go in the mines, not like a lesser faction, but like, you know, and mines and things like that, because that would be appropriate, and excluding that would not necessarily make sense. And so there's little things to consider there.
It's just with so many options.
Yeah,
how much do you? At some point, you have have to trust a GM to go and look in that, but giving them a few ideas. I think that oftentimes in adventures, especially open-ended ones like that, there's often a little sidebar box that says, this is something you should consider. And that here is a couple of ideas to maybe inspire you. And we're going to let you extrapolate from these ideas and run with it. Yeah. And I think maybe that's where a little sidebar would be useful.
Yeah. So just a little list, like, you know, here's a few alternate situations that we came in, thought, you know, we realized. And so you can food for thought.
And they didn't really talk about it in the adventure, but, you know, different settings can have different emotional subtext to them.
Absolutely.
As well as different weather patterns and lighting. And I think that's another nice, interesting thing to consider, too, when you're trying to tie emotional beats with the setting that they're in. I don't know if you tried to do that at all, but yours being kind of agnostic.
Yeah, not as much, but it's bringing to mind that almost a trope where like movies like set in LA or something, and it's like not traditionally snowing, but like when they want a dramatic moment at the end, everyone's like steps outside and it starts snowing. I think Crash did this, but I think that this is actually a trope that a lot of Hollywood films like to engage in. But you know, it's an example, and tropes are tropes for a reason. In a world with magic, right? Having contrasts and things that are a little different than what you see in real life can be, again, a good little accent on whatever emotional beat you're trying to convey.
We'll take a second to talk about the next pep talk, which was the German forest. And this was... Pep talk. Yeah, this was... they were coming in and saying, this may be a point in this process where you feel discouraged. Don't compare yourself to others. Recognize that feeling discouraged is natural. They talked about a TED Talk by Jay Abendrod from Radiolab, where he says almost in every project they work on, they get to the point in the middle where it seems so overwhelming that they don't know where to go next. They don't know how to get all the ideas they have and give them structure and get them onto paper in such a way where it be a cohesive and enjoyable thing for someone to consume. But then he says that oftentimes when he gets trapped in that forest, that's when he gets his epiphanies and gets his ideas. And that once you've made it through the forest a couple of times, you don't panic as much when you're in that forest and you know that you found your way out before and you can. I think that you've been kind of feeling overwhelmed this week.
Well, so one part was it said like, oh, this is usually the stage. This is the stage where people either continue or give up. And I was like, oh, I have permission to give up now. That's good. But then I don't know. Well, but again, this goes back to that, just keep writing. Like, I think at least when I was working on other things again, that when you hit this point, because you kind of always hit this point that rings true to me, is that, you just have to keep writing. Again, recognizing that some things may be terrible. I remember that, last summer I was trying to work on a novella for a contest, and there was like a very tight deadline. And with 1 week left to go, my readers came back and said, like, a quarter of what you've written out of this was like a 40,000 word thing, like a quarter of it doesn't work. Like, we don't understand what you're trying to do. It's boring. It's bad. It's confusing. You have to rewrite it, and you got like a week left. And I was just like, but I made it out. I made it out. It's probably going to get rejected, but at least I wrote it and I finished it, and it's in a state where I was reasonably happy with it. Good. And I count that as a victory. Yeah.
So we'll keep pushing through this. Yeah. And you have to hold us, you can hold us accountable.
But you have to have faith in yourself.
And you said, keep pushing through and keep putting words on paper. And like I said, there was 2 times this week where I had little epiphanies, just like when I was just sitting in a quiet place. I was like, oh, or someone said something that made me go, oh, and tweak something very fundamental, but that it gave it new life and new spark. And you never know when those will hit.
Right. And sometimes it's important just to take a step back and take some time for yourself and relax and
you got to get away.
Take some of that pressure off to allow your subconscious to work. Yeah. I find taking hot showers works really well, actually.
Yeah, no, I guess my shower. And we're going to jump right here for a second. We went to see a play last night. Was that last night?
2 nights
ago.
Friday night.
Yeah. Called She Kills Monsters, which I had never heard of before. Fantastic play about D&D, about a person working through some trauma that they had by playing D&D. And it was such a cute, fun little show. Mm-hmm. If you've never heard of it before, go look it up, see if any local theater companies are doing anywhere near you. But that was great. And that, I think, inspired both of us a little bit to keep plugging through on this. Yeah. And also helped show me a little bit, too, that, these D&D adventures do tie into real life pain and real life trauma. And that being able to you can work through some of these things by taking things in real life, making metaphors of them in these adventures, and then killing them with swords in the face. And
in a sense, yeah.
And it's empowering. And when you feel like you may not have power out in the real world, to suddenly being able to jump in a game like this and be the savior of the city or the region, and it can be helpful. Mm-hmm. But let's move on to the next lesson. The next lesson was lesson number 8, villains, evil NPCs and antagonists. And this was just released today, so we just read this a few hours ago. Do you have a villain in yours?
Yes and no. And in a way, I almost feel like I felt compelled to add some sort of big bad and villain or boss fight at the end, just because it's narratively expected. But I think it's always interesting. The most interesting stories are the ones where there's not necessarily a clear-cut villain or even a specific person to defeat. Because I think a lot of times in real life, right, it's not necessarily that black and white, where some problems maybe you just have to live with to an extent. Not gaslighting, though. That's bad. But
I will say, like, in the games that we've played, and we're playing through Storm King's Thunder with our group, and I feel like the parts that you guys have latched onto the most have been some of the villains. Like,
that's true.
And like having those antagonists who are needles in your side and just calling you, you just want to get them so bad. Like, and I feel like, especially in D&D, like that's helpful to have.
I think so. I think that sometimes though, that again going back into the world of fiction, right? A lot of the most experimentation you see is often in the shorter stories, because they can kind of just laser in on one thing. You don't have the entire weight of the world to carry on your shoulders, right? In a campaign, there are certain things that are expected when you put a time investment into it, and so I think that one shots maybe is a place where you can get away with a bit more or something different.
Yeah, I mean, mine definitely has at least two very different twists than your standard game that you couldn't get away with in a long campaign.
Yeah.
And so yours does too. So maybe ours would be good ones to contrast against each other. If I have a very prominent villain, more prominent than I was originally intending him to be. And let's talk about a little bit the lesson. Things that they recommended for your villain. And I can talk about it in terms of mine just a little bit, since you don't have necessarily a defined villain at this point.
Well, I can talk about it a bit, but
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
you go ahead.
The first quality they talk about is having the villain be relatable. And I think for mine, to me, that means having a villain who you understand what their motivation is. The villain is the hero of their own story, especially narcissist. They think that what they're doing is the absolute right thing to do. And I think the characters or the players should be able to say, yeah, I understand his point of view or her point of view. They're wrong and they're evil, but I understand what they're trying to do. And that if the players didn't exist, that the villain would continue with their plan and it would come to fruition. Is that how you kind of see relatability a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think...
And not just being an evil cloud that eats planets.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a little bit of an issue sometimes with people seeing relatable villains as being villains who that you should be able to cheer for. And I don't think that's necessarily has to be true. I think it has to be more, though, that you could maybe see yourself doing the same things had you experienced the same
That's
things
not like
as a villain.
the definition of Marvel comics in a way, where you or even a lot of comic books too. Like it's just if not but for this, I could have been.
Yeah, and and you can go into the philosophy of this quite in depth, and we probably won't. But it's funny you bring up Marvel, because when I was saying that, I was thinking about Thanos and the Thanos did nothing wrong.
And that's definitely one. Yeah,
but I disagree, right? Because genocide is wrong.
Sure.
And I don't feel like just finding Thanos relatable means that you have to think that he didn't do anything wrong.
Because Thanos doesn't think he did wrong.
He
Thanos
doesn't, and you can understand.
He's the hero of his story.
You can understand that, but I don't think you have to try to justify it, and that's where I kind of draw the line. And again, it varies case by case, but I think he's one of those situations where I think people are maybe taking it a little far in terms of, because he's relatable and I think he's a great villain, I have to take that next step and say he actually is a hero and he's just misunderstood. And I think that maybe even fundamentally misunderstands what that character is supposed to be and what that story is.
The next quality they talk about is having the villain be antagonistic, working against the players. Mine's going to be a little twist on that, I think, where the villain's not going to be twirling his mustache and stopping them. He's going to be manipulating them.
But he is still working against their interests.
Oh, yeah. The character's best interests are not his, but his way of getting his interests met are to be charming and to seemingly be helpful. But it's getting him to his end and not theirs. And so it's going to be up to the characters to see, will they see through this? Will they see maybe he's not so bad? Until it's too late. Or they have to figure out why he's doing what he's doing.
Yeah, and that actually brings to mind, when you were saying, if they try to take a direct combat confrontation to him, it doesn't end well. And that was kind of what I thought was interesting, is that, sometimes these villains who are charming, and the scariest part of them is that they're not necessarily a physical threat, but that they are threats in other ways, intellectually or socially, or that they wield great power through influence, but that, they don't necessarily have to also be super strong. So that actually kind of surprised me a little bit when you said that. But I was just curious if that had come to mind in terms of, where his weaknesses should be and where his strengths are to make him not an overwhelming force.
I mean, his weaknesses are going to be his narcissism and that he doesn't think that he makes mistakes. And so he's going to be careless because of that. And so there's going to be ways for the characters to take advantage of that if they recognize it.
Okay.
When I think of great villains, especially the past couple of years, to me, my favorite villain that I love to hate in recent years has been Kilgrave on Jessica Jones. Like, I think that he was ever present in that show. He was definitely relatable. He was definitely antagonistic and threatening. And I think that is going to be in some ways a model for the villain that I'm making. They don't have the same powers at all, but that they definitely have a similar personality and the narcissism and the manipulating of people. So I might go back and watch a little bit of that to kind of refresh my memory on how they portrayed him. But that's what I think of a good villain. I don't know if you have anybody in mind that you would model or compare your antagonistic force to.
Well, I mean, so for me, I think the more I think about it, the more, there really isn't a villain for me. So I guess to kind of go into it.
So where is the conflict coming?
The story is that there is a Shadarkai elf who is basically they are the servants of the Raven Queen, who is this godlike figure in the Shadowfell. She was an elf who...
Critical Role players will know who the Raven Queen is.
Okay.
Or Critical Role viewers will know. The players will probably know too. They all watch this show. Friend of the show. Liam O'Brien, Sam Riegel, friend of the show. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So apparently her lore in 5e is a little different than it was in previous editions, and so just to be aware of that. But basically, she is a very she's a neutral alignment character, but is a very kind of goes both ways, mysterious figure, a very tragic figure, and she also traffics in a lot of knowledge and memories and secrets that tend to be on the tragic side. And so that was a kind of a story that appealed to me. I didn't want to dive into her because obviously that's a lot of lore on the wizard side that you don't want to necessarily touch. But I thought it might be interesting to just explore one of her followers. And so she often sends her followers out into other planes of existence to recover something as simple as a trinket or to observe a major world event that is tragic or defining in some way. And so for me, the story was that this character way long ago in basically the prehistory of the Forgotten Realms or whatever setting it's in, to avoid, again, conflict with existing lore, to observe a war. And that when she went there, she got entangled with the people. She rescued an orphan and kind of started raising this child, but at some point her mission kind of intervened and she had to leave this person behind to go shadow this king who is this tragic figure that the Raven Queen originally sent her to observe. And so the big conflict for her was this decision that she made. But I guess what made it interesting for me is that this is not a resolvable conflict. This is a decision that exists in her past, and she has to reckon with it. And she has to potentially learn to forgive herself if she thinks that she deserves to be forgiven for having made this choice. But really, so the villain is kind of her projections of this event and her and the players being forced to work with her impression of what she did. And so my focus is really on making the players kind of understand the situation that she was put in, and then seeing how they would potentially resolve it or attempt to help somebody else resolve it. And so again, where this kind of branches is one is this could be a very social thing where it ends up being that there is no fight at all and it becomes this counseling session to a certain extent. But it can also manifest in the form of of her demons, and they have to actually physically fight these demons. And so there's different ways that this could go, I guess, maybe more depending on the GM and the party's preference than anything else.
I think mine's going to end in a fight.
I think so. So yeah.
And so talking about the next aspect, threatening, that the antagonist needs to be threatening. Mine is threatening by who they are. And they definitely are more powerful than the players and everyone around them. So I don't think that I think my villain doesn't even necessarily have to demonstrate their power, although they're more than willing to. But just by who they are, they project that. Okay. Anything you want to add for how that plays into yours? What the threat is?
I mean, and this is one thing that I'm struggling with, because in making the story be a very surreal kind of metaphor, there are situations where I'm throwing the players into things that really they can't fall back on, like, oh, this is a set of goblins, this is their challenge, and things like that. And so I didn't want to. So I wanted situations where the players would come up with things that are very powerful, but then you don't want to kill the players for playing. And so it ended up having to be this situation where potentially the players can't die in this story because it's a dream, it's an experience they're going through. But there has to be other repercussions potentially. And I think what this really comes down to, and like you're saying with the play testing, is that this may be a situation where it's up to the GM and how well they feel like they can immerse the players into identifying and being empathetic with this story. And so again, this, like I said, this is not a traditional story. This is something that I'm trying to experiment with. It may not go down well at all, but this is one of those places where that you can experiment with that. And I think that's going to be key, is that this has to be a story that resonates with the GM, and there has to be a story that the GM wants to tell. And maybe just accept that this is not a story that is necessarily for everyone, and that it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nice thing about these little one shots on DM's Guild is that you can target them and make your put a little blurb on the thing of like who might enjoy this, and so that's good. The last aspect for making an evil NPC or antagonist is that they should be special in some way. As far as mine goes, mine is not a typical member of their race. Behave differently than what you would expect. And I think in lieu of this person's behavior and the way they carry themselves and the situation they find themselves in, that makes them unique. Anything you want to add for yours, for how it is? I mean, yours is already special in the very nature of the conflict, so I think that kind of covers that. I mean, we're applying things here to yours that don't necessarily apply.
And again, I think I need to disclaimer being that I could very well be doing all sorts of things wrong, and that I have a tendency to kind of try to strike out. Like, you tell me one thing that I shouldn't do, and I'm going to try to find a way to do it. And so I think, again, this workshop is really good in that the lessons that they're giving are things that they're hard-won lessons that these professionals have gone through themselves. Yeah. And so that is something I want to be cognizant about, that I keep talking about deviating, and I fully recognize that this may end up being a learning lesson for me as well, and this whole thing may just fall flat, and I think that's okay. But that it is something that I think a lot of people go through that sort of thing,
and this is the first time that we've tried anything like this.
Yeah,
and so
maybe you're just watching me fail, but maybe in watching me fail, that conveys those sorts of lessons more than just someone telling you, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, or maybe you should try it this way instead of this way.
But it's certainly far more interesting to do something different and unique, and whether it's success or failure, than just write another one of those dungeon and crawls.
Which again, there's nothing wrong with that if you enjoy it. But
yeah, exactly right. But like there are a lot of those out there, and just writing like, oh, I want a beholder and have a traps and rolling perception to see if it's the traps like, and then you have this room where you fight this and this room where you fight that. Like, there's a lot of those out there, and so trying something different, I think, is fantastic.
And again, I think like if you want something that's very number crunching and stuff like that, right? That's a lot of times maybe what video games are for, because they're programmed, right? They're mechanical. They can't improvise, right? It's only whatever someone codes in. And the beauty of Dungeons and Dragons is that these are real people involved, and they can respond accordingly, and they can tailor a story accordingly. And so if you want to experiment, this really is the place to, and hopefully you have a group where it's a safe place to be able to try things and talk about things and explore things that are meaningful to you.
The other lesson we had this week was creating believable NPCs for one-shots. So they gave us recommendations on just starting with the very basics. What is this character's gender? What is their race? What is their alignment? And kind of building from that, like what do they look like? What is their appearance? What kind of characteristics do they have that set them apart from other people? And building on that, maybe they have a flaw or a bond, something that they find that's important to them, distilling it down to something manageable for the GM to handle, and then figuring out what they want or need from the players and why they've chosen the players to help them and not somebody else, and what they're offering the player characters. So that's what the lesson was. Do you want to talk about what your NPCs are, how many you have? I know your first adventure you were planning to have a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that's changed. I don't know.
Right. So my goal was to try to force myself into a situation where I couldn't add more NPCs. I slightly failed. So I was like, oh, it's gonna be a dream. It's gonna be this one character who pulls these characters into this other kind of reality, and then they just have to deal with her. But then it's like, oh wait, but she has a history, and there's manifestations of different aspects of her personality, and so like suddenly there are all these characters again. But for me, at least it simplifies it in that these characters don't have driving motivations of their own. They're not actually distinct characters. They're reflections of this single person. So there's only so much you can get. You can build off of that. So it gives me these guardrails. But I'm really interested to hear about your NPCs, because it sounds like you actually have a lot of them, and a lot of them maybe have their own agency and their own motivations. So would you like to elaborate on kind of how you applied this lesson?
Sure. And Satine talked to me last week about, don't overwhelm it too much with NPCs, because every NPC you add adds another thread that needs to be connected to everything. And so that grows exponentially. I decided that I think 5 NPCs is what I needed for this adventure, to have enough variety to tell the story. And yeah, my NPCs are interesting, I think, because due to the nature of the theme of being gaslighting and being challenging people's realities, that the NPCs that the players encounter are going to have a different view of reality because they're already victims. So the things that they believe are not necessarily the things that the players see to be true. And so I think that creates an interesting thing with the players when they see these NPCs who seem to believe different things than they do. Like their first thought is to be suspicious. And so think like these people are working against us, because players are always suspicious. That scarecrow in the field, we're going to keep a wide berth from that scarecrow. And it's a scarecrow. We don't want to walk anywhere near this. So these players, they're going to be suspicious of these NPCs, and so I hope that they're going to have to demonstrate what's happening to these NPCs. So eventually, hopefully, they will kind of figure out what's going on in the story, and so I think that's going to be an interesting aspect of it. And I wanted my player characters to be unique in their own sense, but I wanted to. And I felt like I had to make 2 backstories for every player character.
Oh, okay, yeah.
For every NPC, because they have their real reality and their history, and then they have what they believe now based on their manipulation. And I wanted to provide the GM with both of those so that the GM could hint and play these accurately. And I mentioned earlier that I wanted to have a section for how to role play all these NPCs in such a way where that you play them as victims of manipulation, of gaslighting. And so to give those kind of hints and clues about their self-esteem being low and them being depressed and them not having confidence in themselves and not having confidence in their own reality. But also when the player characters maybe challenge these NPCs on the things that the NPCs have wrong. When someone challenges you on something that you feel is your reality, you get defensive. And you don't necessarily take it well. And so I think that when that comes up, that's going to be what happens. These NPCs are going to get defensive, and they're going to deny, and they're going to rationalize. And that's what happens. And so that's how I need the GM to play those characters. And I want to see what the players think of that and how they handle it. So that's going to be interesting. One thing I also a slightly different angle. Like I say, I like to visualize things, and it helps me. I just got a message. A friend of mine, Hung Pham, who you know, has agreed to do like a portrait of at least one of my NPCs for the story, so I can put it inside my adventure. Ideally, I would have like little portraits of all 5 of them, but art is expensive. Art's really expensive, and so I broke the budget with the cover piece, which is really important. But oh my god, I'm looking forward to it. But I'm trying to see what I can do. I figure you put this thing out there on DM's Guild, you can go and edit things. You can go and like revise them. There's like version 1, version 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. Finish that thought.
No. Yeah. And so like, if this becomes successful to some extent, I could go back and add a little art later on if I, once I get more money and like can afford it. But if I'm gonna go ahead, Hung is an excellent artist. Check the description of the video. I'm gonna try to find out if he has a website or portfolio. I don't know if he does. If he does, it'll be in the description below. You can go check it out.
Because we're paying him with exposure. No, I'm just
no,
kidding.
we are not paying with exposure.
I know that's the bad. Don't ever try to pull that on an artist.
No,
just saying.
but do check him out. He is getting paid, I promise you. But yeah, check that out.
So I had a bad thought.
What's that?
About that. Acquire like the royalty free or the stock photos that you can pay.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to say too.
And then like apply a filter on them.
I was going to say, like, we're talking about art, and I failed to mention this earlier, but there on DM's Guild, in particular, there's a lot of Wizards of the Coast provided art.
Yes.
That you can have of NPC kind of characters, of monsters. There's a lot of art. So, if you don't have hundreds of dollars to throw around on getting the really nice cover art, there are resources out there where it's common, whatever the phrase is, licensed art.
Well, or I think DM's Guild also hosts artists where they put together a collection of their art for DM, and then they sell it. But it's much cheaper than commissioning your own artwork.
Like sometimes $10, $15 for a whole pack of art that you can incorporate.
And so there are a lot of options out there on DM's Guild and from Wizards alone. Yeah. Although don't assume that just because it's from Wizards, it's allowed in DM's Guild. That is not true.
There's a lot. DM's Guild has the packs. Like if you
go on DM's Guild to get it.
Yeah.
Don't like scan something from a Wizard's book.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing the Ravnica setting. Don't assume that magic art is usable because for the most part it's not, which is really sad for me because magic art is amazing. I think it's great.
Oh, when I was looking those tags on Twitter for like portfolio day, it was just constant magic artists, which there's a lot of magic artists, and I just saw them like, there's no way that one, you have time, and two, that I could afford you. Yeah. I am shocked that I was able to get someone as talented as I was, who was willing to do it within my time frame, within my budget. I got really blessed for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's art. And anything you want to add about NPCs? NPCs are a challenge, and
definitely. And I think again, there's the danger of trying to having NPCs take over the story. If you're a new writer, at least I think there's always this, and then you start writing backstory, right? And you're fascinated with them. I think you sent out a tweet where you said you were going to be very sad if something happened to you.
Yeah, well, the motivation for my characters is going to be hopefully to save these NPCs.
Yeah,
like the NPCs will not take over the story. Like that's not an issue. I think that because mine don't have a lot of agency based on their circumstances.
True.
But they're victims and they need the PC's help.
Yeah,
they don't know they're in trouble necessarily, and they don't know they need their help. So that's going to be a challenge for the players. So yeah, that's this past week's lessons. This week to look forward to for me, finishing up writing. I need to do a map of the final encounter in chapter 3, and I have to get ready for playtesting because we're playtesting on Friday. Like, what do you have your goal for the week to be?
Get something written. I think again for me, I was talking about having the multiple paths, but I really think that keep it simple. And so for me, at least, my goal is not necessarily to finish the whole thing, but to at least get the main path down, right? And then if players are going to deviate from that, decide which points are actually important to account for, and which points you have to just be like, trust the DM.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my goal is just to do some writing and maybe take a break from video editing a bit.
Yeah. Well, this video is going to take a lot of editing, so
we're way over time.
Yeah, this went a lot longer than I hoped. Probably only Ryan is still watching us,
but hopefully you found this interesting.
Yes. So the 2 of you, maybe. Well, 2. We'll be optimistic. Ryan and hopefully one other person enjoyed this video. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you stuck with us all this time, please do tell us, Ryan and whoever's watching, what you're working on and where your challenges are and what you plan to do with your adventure when you finish it. Are you going to put it on DM's Guild? Like, are you going to finish? And if you've had other ideas or things that have helped you along the way, share that with us. We would love to hear from you. And yeah, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No. Good luck.
Good luck. Keep writing. We'll see you next time on the Gallant Goblin.